tears are a sign of the extent to which we've cherished and appreciated somebody who lived a life that's an example for all of us. We're privileged to have a number of Masvidim today. We're going to hear first from Barbara, who's here with us in person. Then we'll hear from Barbara's son, Jesse, in California, Jonas' grandson. Then we'll hear from Barbara's first cousin, Carol. I have to acknowledge, shows great honor to Jonas this morning. She traveled to be with us from the other side of the country, from Portland, Oregon, to be here with us in person on this occasion, even in a Zoom era. What a great tribute to your presence, Carol, truly is. And then we'll hear, of course, from Stan and from Marty as well.
Okay, people, just be forewarned. Now it's up to me to be making all those weekly phone calls, checking up on y'all. Probably at the most annoying, worst time of the week. Can't blame me, it's hereditary. I always said that my grandmother, my mother's mother, taught me what love felt like. But it was my father who taught me what love looked like. He was always there for me, whether I liked his methods or not. His biggest rule after I was in college and beyond was call me Friday afternoons. Through thick and thin, whether I was in school or working in the carnival for many years, I called him every Friday afternoon. The phone company must have loved him. He took their slogan, reach out and touch someone, very seriously. One icy night in February in New Hampshire, I slipped on the ice and I cut my hand open. I was rushed to the hospital at 8 p.m. and taken into surgery at 8:30. The house phone was busy, no surprise there, and I couldn't get through to tell him what had happened. The hospital got through because when I woke up the next morning, he was by my side. I had a very traumatic childhood, and as an adult, I did not make it easy for him, and Ruth, my stepmother, as well. But while neither of them ever really understood me, each of them in their own way never gave up on me, and for that I'm truly humbled and grateful. My father was a force of nature to me. I think the last time I ever won an argument with him was when I was 4, and I got him to tell me his middle name. And only after promising for like 1,000 times not to tell anyone what it was. I kept that secret until last week when I told Jesse, but only after swearing him to secrecy for like 1,000 times. It starts with an F, and you'll never guess it. My dad was devoted to God and his family, as both evolved for him, incorporating Ruth's family with ours and claiming all their grandchildren as his own. He never stopped learning and attending lectures and shiurim. He davened 3 times a day. I remember in my youngest memory seeing him wrapped in his tallis and tefillin every morning standing by the piano. Every Shabbos and every Chag, every holiday, I accompanied him to shul at the center. From the youngest age I can remember. He taught me the prayers by saying each line in my ear before we sang it so I would know what to say. His timing was amazing, even if he couldn't hold the tune. From this I learned my love of God that has lasted throughout my life, even as I've had to work through and overcome some serious obstacles along the way. When I was in Hebrew school, he was on a bunch of policy committees at the center, maybe all of them, I'm not sure. And I remember him being particularly concerned about the education committee, ensuring that our Jewish education was complete and fully rounded. He fought long and hard for what he believed, and as far as I know, pretty much almost always prevailed. He traveled about 3 weeks a month, going out of town to work, and he would be gone anywhere from 2 to 4 nights at a time. But he was always home by Friday to spend Shabbos with us. He never missed a Shabbos. And after lunch on the nice days, he and I would go in the backyard and work on my baseball swing. Yeah, pretty good. When he and Ruth moved into the first independent living facility 4 years ago, roughly, in West Palm Beach, he insisted on them making a Shabbos elevator that rode up to the 10th floor and stopped at each one on the way down. I thought I'd lose my mind waiting to get back down to their second floor, but it didn't bother him because he was doing what God wanted And that's pretty much how he lived his entire life. Just last week, at that point, he was on a pureed diet. He not only refused a spoonful of food because he could smell it was meat, it wasn't kosher. He clamped his mouth tight shut. However, he willingly opened his mouth for some eggs. He didn't compromise his religious principles, even in a situation where extreme leniency was called for. We lay him to rest, a strong and devoted man. May your journey be swift and easy. May you go in peace and be received in peace. And may you hear God say, well done, thou good and faithful servant. I recite over you the pasuk that you wore around your neck that must have had great meaning for you. I also found in his effects a keychain with the same pasuk. He will command his angels for you to protect you in all your paths and your ways.
To be Jesse calling in from California. Jesse, are you okay? You there?
I'm here.
Coming through loud and clear.
All right. I also unmuted myself on Zoom. Is that causing any problems?
No, it's coming through on the chat. Go. Jesse, you're on.
Thank you all for coming today. I posted this on Facebook to share with my friends and family who knew both my grandparents and my grandfather growing up. So some of it is a little bit related to that, especially the first line here. I am incredibly saddened to share that in the last 2 months, I've lost both my grandparents. To those who knew them from my childhood and from Teaneck over the last several decades, Poppop and Baba, also known as Jonas and Ruth Wieser, are no longer with us. They passed within a month of each other, as often happens with couples who have been together a very long time. They're both 96 years old and loved regaling me of stories of the old days and hearing about my adventures and my family. I'm grateful that I was fortunate enough to fly out to Florida multiple times over the past few years to visit, and in the last 2 months for each of them as they entered their final days. My grandfather and I have always had a very close relationship, being that I was his only grandson. And for many of my teenage years, we lived across the yard from each other in the same complex. Every Shabbos lunch, every Saturday lunch, we ate at my grandparents'. And as my friends from Teaneck will attest to, when they often walked over on Saturday afternoon to pick me up to go out and hang out with friends, we were still eating long after my friends finished their meals, and they would often sit down and join us until we finished. My grandfather was a man of few words. He preferred to listen and to serve. No matter where I went in Teaneck or the surrounding area, there was usually someone who knew him or of the things he did for the community. Be it volunteering at Englewood Hospital in his later years, making sure the Jewish patients had appropriate kosher food for Shabbos and holidays, or his work to make sure the JCC, the Jewish Center of Teaneck, was kept running and having daily minyanim, or even the dozen and possibly dozens of phone calls he made weekly to check in on friends and family around the world, it was always clear that he cared. I obviously was not able to know him in his younger years, but I have heard the stories he and others would tell of his work with the railroads, shipping chemicals all over the country. He worked for a pioneering chemical company, and I am grateful to have his tie pin collection from every major event over the years, documenting his experiences in a format that he treasured that is also no longer around. There are two interesting stories that I always loved from his lifetime to tell. In his work with the chemical company, from time to time, they needed to test and demonstrate the effectiveness of their chemicals. Many times, and I have seen the video VHS tape recording of this, in the middle of the night, they would go into one of the tunnels between New York and New Jersey. I think it was the Holland or Lincoln tunnels, but I could be wrong. And they would clean a section of the tunnel. And he always told this portion of the story with a chuckle. I'm not exaggerating here. They pulled out effectively large toothbrushes coated with chemicals. And they would clean portions of the tunnel. And every time people would drive through it, they would see a stretch of the wall in the tunnel that was super clean. And you always knew that was his work. Another story is something that honestly makes me wonder how anyone from their generation survived. According to my grandfather, when he was a teenager, when they were expanding I believe it was the George Washington Bridge, yes, the big one connecting New Jersey to Manhattan, he stopped by one day. I don't remember why he was in the area, but one of the workers saw him and invited him to take a look. They rode the flat platform, quote unquote, elevator, which had no railings, mind you, up to the higher levels of the bridge to look around. It is difficult for me to fathom the life that he led, having been around for nearly 100 years. The amount of progress that has occurred just in my lifetime is staggering, but what my grandparents lived through is a time like no other. From the Great Depression to the Holocaust, a world war, other wars, the Cold War, spaceflight, computers, cell phones, and the internet, it's almost unimaginable what they saw. Despite the rapid change in the world, my grandfather continued to learn new things, to be curious in the world around him. He even had a cell phone up until the very end, which he used to call me and many others every single week. I will sincerely miss those calls, even if he had a knack for knowing the absolute worst time to call, be it during bedtime, getting the kids lunch, walking to the car, in the store, or wherever. He always managed to call just the right time and always put a smile on my face. Through all of it, my grandfather always put one foot in front of the other and kept on going, up until the day he lost his partner, and then it became time for him to stop putting one foot in front of the other. Time to lay back, relax, and leave the world to the next generation. I thank my grandfather, my Poppop, for everything he taught me over the years, for encouraging my curiosity in the way things work, fascinating me with tales of the old days, helping me learn about Judaism, as well as the importance of family, community, keeping in touch, and being a good person to everyone around. He may not have been the most outwardly loving person, but we knew unequivocally that he loved us, and we will always love and remember him.
Uncle Jonas. Uncle Jonas, I have so many memories because he's been in my life forever. From growing up until now, he's always been kind and understanding. When I was in my teens living in Florida, he would come down on business and take me and my best friend Laura out to dinner. One time we went to play golf. I had never been on a golf course before, and I didn't know how to play. He showed me how, and I dug up the grass. Instead of me playing, he had me drive the golf cart. I had no idea not to drive on the green, as it was all green to me. I moved to California and then Oregon. One time, Uncle Jonas and Ruth took the Pacific Northwest train down to California, and they stopped at my house. We had a nice lunch. We talked all the time to each other every week, sometimes twice a week. I'd call him on my way to work, or he would beat me to it and call me. He always asked how the family was, and I would go down the list updating him. He always called on my birthday, and I always called him on his. Family was everything to him. Barbara, Jesse, Karen, Ruth, his brothers, and extended family in Israel. He was so proud of everyone. One time I came to visit Teaneck with my family, and it was Sukkot. Ruth made dinner, and we ate outside in the decorated sukkah in the backyard. When I'd go to Florida to visit my family, I would drive across the state to visit Uncle Jonas and Ruth. We were always very happy to see each other. I would coordinate with Barbara some of the times, and he loved that. We had good times sitting at the table. He loved chocolate, ice cream, and family. I will miss my weekly calls with my uncle. He told me family was the most important thing, and I was to make sure to keep everyone together, tell our story to the kids, and keep the memory alive. I miss him so much.
I didn't know Jonas as a child. Either when he was a child, certainly, or when I was a child. So most of my memories are kind of snapshots of holidays or trips, more as a friend, really, than as a parent. We've heard that Judaism played a very important role in his life. And often when we came to visit him in Teaneck, he wasn't home. He was at YU auditing courses. Even in Florida, even towards the end, his vision was failing. He had large print Siddur Machzorim so that he could continue to daven. And when he couldn't see anymore, we would tune in the services on the internet so that he could follow along and listen. Very, very important part of his life, for sure. As I mentioned, most of my memories are holidays and trips. We spent many, many Pesach with him and with Mom, going from a camp in Connecticut where we froze to one year they went to Brandywine in Pennsylvania for Pesach. We spent a number of years with them at the Nevele, number of years in Miami Beach with them and some dear friends of theirs. And of course at Morse Palace, when they could no longer travel, we made Pesach for them there at the house. Every Hanukkah, we would all go to my friend Joel's house. We would eat latkes of various sorts. Joel thought he was a chef, and he would make yucca latkes and all kinds of strange things. But we always had a good time. We played dreidel with him. We would get the chocolate gelt, and it was very nice. Purim, we were able to go with him to shul to listen to the Megillah. And Mom took a lot of nachas in having a Purim Suda and having the whole family over to her house. It was very nice. Shabbos dinners. We always went, when we lived near them, we went with them for Shabbos dinner Friday night. Very often their dear friend Lenny Lipton was with them. He was a childhood friend of Jonas's. We made a trip to Israel with REA and my daughter Jenny, both here today. And it was a wonderful couple of weeks that we spent. I see they're both smiling. You guys remember. I'm sure they have some memories that we probably would never want to know about. We did a couple of trips with them with home share for a few years. We spent a week with them in Cape Cod. We spent a week with them in Las Vegas and in Williamsburg. Are you missing one?
Yeah, in Keys.
Oh, in the Florida Keys, yes. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. It was just a joy spending time with them. One of the things that I remember vividly, and my back still remembers, is packing the car. They took the auto train for many years from Florida to New Jersey and then back to Florida. So they would winter in Florida and summer up here. And Jonas had a way of packing the suitcases. He had this gigantic suitcase. It took two of us to lift this suitcase into the car. He packed the car so that you couldn't see out the back window. The trunk was tied down. You couldn't imagine anything you can imagine that went into that car. And of course, at the Florida end, who had to do that? It was me, but it was a joy. You all heard and you all know that he was on the phone all the time. What you don't know is that he was mechanically and electronically challenged, very challenged. We tried to get him a very simple smartphone, couldn't swipe it. Okay, so we had flip phones, and a lot of them, because they kept breaking. And every time they broke, you couldn't transfer the stuff, the contacts, because they were flip phones and you couldn't do it electronically. So I know every one of his contacts by heart because I put it into about 6 different phones. And it was always the phone's fault. Had nothing to do with his fingers. But he was a very kind-hearted and good person and wonderful to my mom. I never expected to be here this soon, saying the things I'm saying, and we will miss him forever. Baruch Tayom.
On behalf of myself and the entire family, we ask Mechila for the times that we failed to give proper kavod to you, Jonas. Before every air travel, Jonas reliably said he ensured the flyers don't open the windows. On receiving sage advice, he routinely offered his phrase, "Your magnanimity is exceeded only by your perspicacity." Jonas married my mother and came into my life in 1979. I was 30, already married to Rhonda, and he was 53. And so began a 43-year journey with our family. He was dedicated to making Mom happy and helping as best he could. And for this, we will always be grateful. Jonas and Mom lived in the country club section of Teaneck, then on Prince Street across from the Teaneck Jewish Center. And then they became snowbirds. Winters here, as Stan mentioned, with Stan and Charlie in Sunrise, and ultimately as full-year residents in beautiful facilities in West Palm Beach and Lauderhill. During the past 43 years, I came to appreciate one of Jonas's greatest strengths, which could be described with words such as reliability, consistency, routines, and good habits. He maintained his clothes meticulously. He even had a regular rotation of different shoes for each day of the week. When he came into the house, he did the Mr. Rogers routine, closet, and his shoes were in shoe trees when not in use. Every morning, according to routine, he had his favorite fresh fruit, oranges, and every evening he had his favorite brown vegetable, chocolate. Thank you, Jonas, for letting me share in your stash. If you were on Jonas's call list, you could expect a call like clockwork, wherein he might ask, "What's doing in your world?" He kept up with so many relatives and friends on a regular basis. In the realm of Judaism, his consistency, routines, and good habits might be called traditions. Jonas followed the tradition of davening every day in shul. For years, he was a member of what they called the Millionaires Club at the Teaneck Jewish Center. When there wasn't a regular minyan in Sunrise, Florida, Jonas took the lead in forming one. When COVID forced the world indoors, Jonas was a regular on the Teaneck Jewish Center Zoom minyan. At home, Jonas had fixed routines of observance. He routinely washed his hands and made hamotzi and benched out loud at every dinner, all week. Our children independently sent me comments about Grandpa's consistent style of benching. He would sing, you call it singing, he would sing the word Rachamim with great gusto. He would tap the table when it said Shulchan Zeh, and he customarily ended with Ba Shalom. Right? Why should life be sweet only on Rosh Hashanah? On Shabbos, all year round, Jonas's challah was draped in honey. Carefully. Jonas's Torah study had a daily rhythm. In his retirement, Jonas routinely included trips to YU to hear shiurim with his neighbor, Morris Zimmerman, Zichrono Livracha. And he was a regular at Rabbi Michael Talbus's Lunch and Learn shiurim for seniors. Rabbi Menachem Meyer even presented Jonas with a framed plaque for being the most dependable attendee at his shiur. With his vision and health in decline, he would listen to a steady stream of online shiurim, including his favorites of grandson Aryeh Leibowitz and nephew Rabbi Simcha Wieser. I'll close with a story about a classic interaction that I witnessed between Rabbi Friedman and Jonas. See if he remembers this one. It was his first year at the center. Background on this is that, as you heard, is Jonas kept a long list of family yortzites from the Leibowitz and the Finkelstein families, and from the Leibowitz and Freund families, the Wieser families. So it was Rabbi Friedman's first year as rabbi, and he had a beautiful method of introducing and designating who would read out loud each sentence of a Simchas Torah prayer called Ata Haresa. So rather than announce the next reader's name, Rabbi Friedman would creatively describe that intended person. His descriptions were so specific and accurate that there was no mistaking of who he was calling on. And to paraphrase, he called out, the next line of Ata Haresa will be read by the man who says Kaddish for the yortzeit of every second cousin once removed of his wife's brother's uncle. Everyone knew that Jonas thought about and said Kaddish for yortzeits that others would have long forgotten. He made lasting impressions on all who had the privilege of knowing him, and he will be missed.
None of us were there 83 years ago when Jonas Wieser was first called to the Torah, our mitzvah. They called him by his Hebrew name, Yonah Feivel ben Dov Ber. The sages of the Talmud describe a measure of prophecy to parents in the process of naming a child, one which I'm certain inspired Jonas's own parents in calling him by the name Yonah. The prophet Yonah, or Jonah in the English, occupies a particularly sacred place in our tradition. His story is read at the holiest moment of the year, at the end of the most sanctified day of Yom HaKippurim, during Mincha, just before Ne'ilah, when the gates of prayer are closing. According to rabbinic tradition, the prophet Jonah was the son of a woman from the prophets, Isha Tzarfatit, a woman who did kindness with the prophet Elijah, but then whose young son, according to rabbinic tradition, the man who would grow up to be the prophet Yonah, takes gravely ill, even dies. And then this child is restored to life by the prophet Elijah, Eliyahu Navi. I'll never forget when Jonas told me his earliest memory. He's just about 5 years old. He'd been in a terrible accident and he had been unconscious for a very significant period of time. And he remembered waking to the image of his grandfather hovering over him, reciting psalms, reciting Tehillim, for the restoration of the life of the child, who would go on to live over 90 years beyond that date. The image of a man hovered in prayer over a child, whether it was Eliyahu Navi over the original Yonah, or the grandfather over Jonas Wieser, is so deeply fitting for Jonas of later years and decades, for this is how so many of us knew him. He was synonymous with the mitzvah of tefillah. Sefer Tehillim, David HaMelech, King David uses an expression, Va'ani tefillah, I am prayer. I can speak for myself. Sometimes I pray, but I'm not prayer. Jonas was prayer. The prophet Yonah was submerged in the very depths, in the bowels of a fish. We're told, Vayispalel Yonah Adonai Elohav minei hadaga. Jonas was so deeply devoted to prayer under any and all circumstances. As you heard, he was a pillar of our shul minyan. When he relocated to Florida, and most people, when they move, they get to a certain age, and we call and we keep up the relationship, and they tell me about the bingo games that they get to play, the wonderful things and the activities that are really so important to maintaining a life of quality and vibrancy. But Jonas, what he wanted to tell me about every single time was Minyan. How we got to Minyan, the shuttle, how it worked. It never changed. Vani Tefillah. If you saw him in his twilight years, whether it was over the Zoom, so we saw him 3 times a day, and it was really difficult for him to see and to pray. You could see him utilizing every ounce of his bodily strength to be able to form the words of prayer. A life spared by the prayers of a grandfather over a once young boy became the prayers of that boy as an adult, and indeed as an aged man. The Talmud, in contemplating the question of whether one can offer voluntary prayer, cites a tradition in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Halavai she'yispalel adam kol hayom kulo. Would that it were that a person would daven every day. It's meant to be a statement of some hyperbole, but Jonas at the end was mispalel kol hayom kulo. However long it took him, whatever strength he had, he would wake himself up, say another few lines. Second, the prophet Jonah is introduced to us as a man of truth. Yonah ben Amittai, from the word emes. The reason that he's reluctant to head to Nineveh, as you'll recall the story, to call to the people to repent, is because he feels deeply that they're deserving of divine justice, not mercy. Of course, from a certain point of view, he's correct. But as we know, the Almighty is a Kel Rachum Mechanun, he's compassionate. Jonas was a man of truth and fierce dedication to it. Sometimes in the synagogue, we would, in a very loving way, have what we call disputes for the sake of having machlokas l'shem shamayim, certain traditions. Especially when there's a special prayer that we recite after the Amidah, the petitionary prayer of Tachana. Certain days Jonas felt we should skip, I felt we should say. I'd explain in great length, I'd give all the sources, why it's really important that we should say Tachana on a particular day. And Jonas was always respectful. He always would move up to the front row on those days when I would get up between Mincha and Marav, the afternoon and evening prayers to explain. We'd move up to the front row, we would listen intently, but I never quite convinced him. He was a man of passion for truth and rectitude as he saw it. The prophet Jonah received a second lease on life, second opportunity to bring the people of Nineveh to repentance. Vahi devar Hashem el Yonah shenis. Lamor, the word of God, came to Yonah a second time. After the tragic loss of Gladys, Jonas too was given a second chapter, the 43 years that he shared, as you heard, with Ruth. They discovered each other in a period of mutual grief and brought each other consolation and so much more. Neither Ruth nor Jonas, they each told me independently, they never took this for granted. They always thanked God for what he had given them the opportunity. What they achieved together, what's seated in front of me, is beyond words. It's remarkable. You see a lot of blended families. I only know one like the one that's in front of me. When I had one of my last true conversations with Jonas last month, just after Ruth's passing, he seemed pensive, more pensive than usual. And I asked him what he was thinking about, what was on his mind. And you heard it before, Jonas was Emor ma'adva say harbe. He said little, he did much more than he said. He got straight to the point. In response to my question, what are you thinking about? He said 3 words, 43 years. After 96 years of commitment to his family, to Yiddishkeit, to emes, the truth, the gates are now closing, as they do every year on Yom Kippur, following the reading of the story of Jonah, and in this case, following Jonas's earthly journey. But here I just want to add that it seems fitting that Jonas had a second name. Mentioned before, Yona, not only Yona, but Yona Feivel, which is the Yiddish word for a candle, for a flame. And Jonas's flame for us will continue to burn brightly, and illuminate a path for us of dedication to family, to Yiddishkeit, to MS, the truth, to Tefillah, to Chesed, his volunteer work at the hospital, which you heard about. We would be remiss if we didn't conclude today by thanking the Almighty, who over 90 years ago, listening to the prayers of a grandfather who chose to allow that flame to continue to burn so that all of us might be touched, warmed and illuminated by it. For his family, for his community, for everyone who knew him. The light of Jonas Wieser, who we say farewell to in a physical sense now, is not extinguished today, but will continue to be a source of guidance for all of us, and his legacy will carry on. Talmud tells us that the word Sav, which is of numerical value 96 years of Jonas's life, Sav, the Talmud tells us, it's a mitzvah l'sha'ah u'ledoros. It has a place in its own time, but it carries on for all generations. The sha'ah is now ended. The doros is just beginning. It's what you see in front of you. It's the legacy of a man who was in every fiber of his being, as we said before, in Adam Kasher. I'll ask everybody to please rise for the Yom. שוכן במרומים, המצי מנוחה נכונה על כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזורקי המזהירים, ונשמת יונה פייבל בן דובר, שהלך לעולמו, בעבור שאנחנו מתפללים ביד הזכרת נשמתו, בגן עדן תהא מנוחתו. לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו, אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר אמן. I'd like to call forward the members of Jonas's family to serve as the Nosei Ha'aron, the pallbearers, Lee, David, Aryeh, Yoni, and Rabbi Benji. As Barbara mentioned, we'll recite words of the 91st Psalm as we escort Jonas out of the chapel. And as you heard, for those who are continuing on to the Kahura, to the base Olam, in the cemetery, please join the procession.
As we usher the casket out of the chapel, I ask that the immediate family follow directly behind, and then remaining family and friends please do follow. So gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, 3 on each side, and you can push forward. And we'll meet you up.